Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome to everyone joining us for this live virtual session brought to you by People Matters in association with Nordscape. My name is Jerry, and I'm part of the People Matters team here. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you all to this live session today. So, we're talking today about building an emotionally intelligent workplace. And this is something we've probably all experienced in our work life, right? You've seen some leaders struggle to cope with emotions, and you've seen the impact of that. It could be leading to disastrous decisions at work, whether it's people centric or business centric, right? At the same time, there are those leaders who are able to analyze their emotions, they're able to handle it well, and they're able to find a balance between their business priorities, team needs, and people needs. And they're also able to drive their teams to greater standards of conduct and performance. And so today we will be talking to experts on this theme to capture how they are thinking about building an emotionally intelligent workplace. And yeah, we will have some key action tips for you, and we hope this conversation is really useful to you. So, with that, I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers for this panel. We have with us Surya Prakash Mahopatra, who is the Global Head for Talent Transformation and Learning and Development at Wipro Digital. And he has over 20 years of experience in various leadership roles, including several IT and ITES organizations. And he's helped set up a global training function for Wipro BPO, which spanned across 10 countries, including Brazil, Mexico, Romania, Poland, China, and India. Welcome, Surya. It's great to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here.
Great. We also have with us Anne Soumya, who is the Director for HR at Adecco India. And she's an HR professional with over 20 years of organizational experience in human resources strategy and end-to-end HR operations design and implementation management. Again, across various industries, including BPO, captives, and IT services. And she's currently passionate about designing people strategy that's in alignment with the driving key business metrics. Great to have you with us, Anne.
Thank you, Jerry, and hi, everyone. Very good afternoon. Looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. We also have with us Rajiv Jayaraman, who is the founder CEO of Nordscape. He spearheads the organization's strategy and serves on its board. And over the past few years, Rajiv has built a high octane global team at Nordscape that helps organizations accelerate employee development using an integrated learning and assessment platform. And under his leadership, Nordscape has delivered durable business outcomes for over 370 leading organizations across 25 countries. And he has a keen interest in psychology of learning, design, and technology. Most recently, he is the author of the book Clearing the Digital Blur, which is a definitive guide to helping organizations and leaders transform at the speed of digital. Great to have you with us, Rajiv.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So before we begin this conversation, I would encourage our audience to ask questions. If you have any comments, if you have any thoughts that you would like to share on this topic, feel free to use the chat section that's at the right-hand side of your screen. And we have reserved some time at the end of this conversation to take up some audience questions. So feel free to post your thoughts throughout this session at any time. Right? Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump right into the discussion. So, first question really is a definition, right? So, how would you, each of you, define emotional intelligence at the workplace? Can we start with Anne?
Sure, Jerry. The way I'd like to look at it, and especially in an adult environment where we come into a professional environment to work, to me, I feel where does emotional intelligence come into play? Often it is when conflict arises, right? And we all know that conflict is between one person who may be right, one person who's not right or wrong. But in a professional setting, often, more often than not, the conflict is not between a right and a wrong. The conflict is between your right and my right. And emotional intelligence is often comes into play when both of us, with your right and my right, have to come together and decide what is right for the organization. And that's where I think emotional intelligence is of utmost importance, and how I would define it. How does two people who believe that they are right come together and decide which is the best right for my organization? So I think I would define it that way. So what is required is understand my emotions, be able to control it, be able to express and manage interpersonal relationships judiciously, empathetically, to reach right organizational goals.
Fantastic. I really like how beautifully you put it, between your right and my right, but is it aligned to the organization's right? So that's great. Surya, can we have your thoughts on this?
Oh, I completely agree with Anne, what she said. I think she has put it beautifully. If I have to, define emotional intelligence, or if I have to talk about an organization where emotional intelligence is highly valued, I would say such an organization provides workplace where everyone's ideas are respected and valued. I think that is the first and foremost. An organization where collaboration happens naturally and spontaneously, where decisions are highly valued. I think once you agree what is right for the organization, everybody values it, irrespective of their personal opinion. An organization where colleagues celebrate each other's success, right? An organization where stumbling blocks are removed quickly because people come together and they stand up for each other. An organization where integrity is valued. An organization where human potential is continuously developed because it creates a non-threatening environment where human potential can thrive. So I would say an organization where emotional intelligence is highly valued provides these opportunities. Or this is what we get to see in such an organization.
Fantastic. I think you made a list of habits and values that's very central to the success of the company. So thank you so much for sharing that, Surya. Rajiv, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, to me, I think for the longest time, business has been very left-brained, right? Profits, Excel spreadsheets, processes, and so on, right? But in the last 10 years, I think there has been, at least in boardrooms, it's okay to talk about happiness, well-being, what otherwise was brushed aside as touchy-feely things are becoming important, right? So I think finally we have a space inside an organization to talk about these things that really matter to the human. And the other bigger change that's happening around us is in the industrial age, it was all about one size fits all. Today, the larger change that's happening is everything is tilting towards the individual. And when we're talking about individuals, the individuals, like Surya rightly pointed out, their values, what matters to them, their feelings, their emotions, all of those things start to count, right? And if we are operating in the workplace with industrial leadership systems and industrial values, then definitely we are out of touch. And that's why I think this topic is very timely. It's time to introduce emotional intelligence and well-being in predominantly left-brained organizations.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rajiv, for sharing that. I think we're also observing it here at People Matters, where we're having a lot more conversations around wellness. For example, something that we didn't discuss as much, but today it's more commonplace, and we're seeing leaders discuss this more. So great. Surya, the next question is to you. We're navigating what seems to be like a hybrid workplace for, the short term at least. What is the impact of emotional intelligence in streamlining functions and creating the right work culture?
Well, I think this is a great question. The impact of emotional intelligence on streamlining functions and creating the right culture in a hybrid workplace. So, I think the pandemic has disrupted everything. It has challenged many of our paradigms. We are living in a new normal. I think all of us are familiar with that. That's no longer a new word. So, what is changing? I think a lot of things are changing. Functions, practices, processes, and organizations are changing. Let me quote Daniel Goleman. He said something very interesting. He said, out of control emotion makes smart people look stupid. So somebody might be highly intelligent, but if he or she cannot control his or her emotions, he or she would look stupid. Organizations today have realized that they cannot afford to hire stupid people. They may not hire smart people in some cases, but they cannot afford to hire stupid people. So the first impact that we see today is on in selection, recruitment, and that's what we are seeing today. Now, emotional intelligence is one of the key competencies what organizations are looking at while recruiting engineers, recruiting project managers, recruiting talent into their organization. So it has become an important criteria for selection. It is being looked at for progression to leadership roles. So, while it is important that a leader must have strategic perspective, must have the execution, must have clear line of sight on the organization's vision, somebody who can bring in, create and communicate a strategy and vision. While all that is important, emotional intelligence today tops the chart. So while selecting people into leadership roles, now this is being looked at. It is a key consideration for selection, progression to leadership roles. The L&D function is definitely, is seeing an influence. I think from an organizational perspective, I'm an L&D leader myself, and in the last couple of years, given what is happening around us, given the way pandemic is impacting organization, the way today everybody is vulnerable, we see that we need to develop our leaders. We need to enable our leaders to become more intelligent in terms of EQs. They need to develop their EQ. They need to improve on their emotional intelligence. So programs like nonviolent communication, nurturing talent, and a whole lot of other programs which have actually taken center stage. Mentoring and coaching, we believe, are key enablers when it comes to emotional intelligence. When people are struggling in a hybrid workplace, in a very stressful environment, and when today we talk about the great global resignations, you know in an environment which is stressful, when business is growing but demands of customers are kind of evolving, and you are losing your key talent, and then you have pressures at home. In an environment like this, I think is important that we need to support our people. So coaching and mentoring play a very important role. The reward and recognition practice, those processes are definitely, while the focus in the past were rewarding the top performer, the guy who brought in the highest revenue to the company, or somebody who kind of excel in sales, or in meeting key CPMs for the business. While they continue to remain important for organizations, but now, in a reward and recognition practice, now organizations looking at, can we reward people who are collaborators, who are helping others succeed, who are excelling in teamwork, etc. So these are some of the changes that we are seeing. I would possibly look at them as impact of emotional intelligence on functions, and the way organizations are looking at streamlining their practices and building a culture of very strong emotional intelligence.
Fantastic. I think, Surya, you've given a very good overview of the different aspects of the employee life cycle, right? That this touches on, right from hiring to L&D to leadership to even rewards, about how it's sort of changing the conversation across every probably touch point that HR has in the organization. So thank you so much for that, sharing that. So, I'm coming to you now on the significance of emotional intelligence. What is its impact in creating an empathetic work culture? And could you also share Adecco's own experience on this?
Absolutely, Jerry. See, I really think whatever Surya has listed out, those are really great pointers to see whether how emotional intelligence is becoming important at the workplace. Now, for us, the pandemic has really turned our ways, that we work, that each of us knew work and work life as we knew it upside down. So, in the new normal, what is becoming even more difficult for organizations to protect and cascade is the organizational culture, right? So I think I was recently reading in an article, in Narayana Murthy himself stating that he's not a great advocate of working remotely because he feels that it could dilute the culture of the organization. So I feel emotional intelligence has a crucial role to play here, in making sure that the organizational citizenship behavior is preserved. When teams are made up of people who are aware of their own behaviors, their own preferences of how they would like to work in even a remote scenario, many times we say that we are all communicating through video calls or virtual meetings. We may be saying yes, but we may have a no written all over us, right? Which in a face to face environment is easy to read. Communication barriers are much more simpler to crack when you are sitting across the table and you know who you're discussing with. At this point of time, we don't have that liberty. Many times we have to understand people from the tone of their voice, maybe from a yes that may intend a no, so on and so forth. This is where I think emotional intelligence comes to play, where each of the teams interacting with each other, if they are open, first of all, if they themselves understand their emotions, if they know how they can maneuver and master their emotions, express freely, and also work collaboratively with each other. So we all know the Johari window, right? So we know that teams which has the minimum blind spots or blind spaces are the ones that have most effective ability to perform together and deliver together. So, emotional intelligence is very crucial at this point for each of us working in this hybrid or virtual environments to even more master our own selves and the people who we work with. And this, in turn, an organization that takes effort to help people understand and maneuver through this virtual communication barriers will obviously have an edge at how they preserve their organizational citizenship behavior, and finally the outcome of culture of the organization. And what better way to emphasize the importance than Peter Drucker himself, who said culture eats strategy for breakfast. So with all this coming into play, I think in this world that we are in currently, emotional intelligence at workplaces needs to be given a serious spot in every organization's agenda.
Absolutely. I think said it again very beautifully. I think this concept of organizational citizenship behavior that you spoke about, and also possible challenges that companies need to be mindful of. Great. So, Rajiv, the question to you is on the urgency and need for emotional intelligence. I heard when Anne was talking also, she highlighted the challenges with the remote context, right? And that's sort of also a blind spot, if you will. So, how can this value be measured? And should we even try to measure emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think we should, because as the popular saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? But the question is, what do you measure and how do you do this scientifically? Because there are a lot of measurements we already do, employee engagement and satisfaction scores and all of that. So what is unique about what we are trying to measure here is the question. Now, I think that calls for a deeper understanding of why this is happening in the first place and what are the different dimensions of this. Now, if you just break this down, I think you will find, of course, there are multiple factors that are going on at the same time, triggered by the pandemic and other factors. But really, if you apply it in the workplace, number one, from a productivity lens, Satya Nadella, I think, is believed to have said, decades worth of work seems to have gotten done in a few quarters, right? We seem to have accomplished a lot in a very, very short time, and in a context when this great resignation is going on, which means that people who are left behind are saddled with more work to be done, right? And so that obviously is causing a lot of issues, physical, mental, for the for the workforce. So I think there has to be a study done on the productivity levels, what this whole situation has done to the amount of work we are getting done when this whole line between work and life has been blurred, right? And so what is the impact of that? I think that's a big area of study. Second is, I think from a mental health perspective, the number one reason why I think many issues come is because of the general sense of loss of control we have on what's happening in our lives, right? And that's the number one reason why mental health issues happen. Now, in this context, given the geopolitical issues, a healthcare scare happening in Hong Kong, the very next day on social media reaches us, and we are scared about when it might reach our doors, and loss of loved ones, and all of these factors put together makes us all feel that we are watching television and someone else is holding the remote control, or we are running on the treadmill and someone else is holding the speed dial, right? And so there is a general loss of control that we are facing, which is directly leading to this heightened sense of anxiety and hence mental health issues and so on. So we need to study that aspect also in the workplace. And we know this from our life on the digital world, right? On the digital side of things, let's say take social media. There is a direct correlation between the use of social media and mental health issues. It's been scientifically researched and proven and so on, to an extent that today, did you know that some countries have a minister for loneliness? UK has a minister for loneliness, and so does Japan. And so why are we here when social media is supposed to be connecting all of us? Why are we feeling lonely? If this can happen on social media, the same thing can happen within the organization. We may all feel that, okay, I'm connected on Slack, I'm connected on Salesforce, or whatever the platform may be. But the reality is the digital connection that we are talking about does not translate into human connection. Right, and that's why we need this minister for loneliness in many countries. So it is ironic when social media and digital is connecting us, we still feel this way. So I think all this put together, I think really deserves a detailed study and a measurement technique that can help us manage this better.
Fantastic. I really like about everything that you've covered in terms of the factors that we need to pay attention for. I think right from the heightened sense of anxiety to the general sense of lack of control, and even social media and how it's impacting our mental health. So, Rajiv, what would you suggest in terms of key metrics that organizations can sort of zero in on emotional intelligence currently?
Sure. So I think we do need a holistic way of measuring this and tracking this. And so I do believe that this has to have multiple dimensions to it, including physical wellness. Obviously, if we are all burnt out because of the long hours we are putting in, that will lead to emotional issues. These are interconnected things, right? So physical wellness, mental wellness, obviously, right? How are we doing emotionally? That is very important. And in many industries, there has been an impact on livelihood, right? It's been a lives versus livelihood kind of a trade-off we've unfortunately been forced to make. So there are financial wellness issues that are cropping up, and social wellness issues as well. And you could add spiritual wellness and other elements as well. So I think we need a holistic way of measuring what is actually going on.
Fantastic. I really like that we covered this holistic dimension. I think we always kept hearing about this 5 dimensions throughout these 2 years, I think, of wellness, and how do you address this holistically? That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Rajiv. So, in light of these metrics that Rajiv has shared, Suryan, and I'm coming to you on what are some challenges that you're observing in terms of measuring and evaluating people on emotional intelligence?
So, Jerry, personally, I'm not a big fan of measuring emotional intelligence. You know, if attrition happening in your organization, you don't have to go and check, what is, you really don't have to check whether the emotional intelligence is high or low. It is just a fallout of what's happening, whether it's the behavior of leaders, the way the organization is treating its people. So there are many symptoms that we can see and understand, what's happening. I don't think we really always need to, use a tool to measure emotional, intelligence of people. The bigger question is, once we measure it, what are we going to do with this? That's the bigger question. And I think we need to get a handle on that. Today, I think the primary challenge, one of the challenges is attrition. The organizations are in a flux. People are coming in, people are going out. So it's and then there are organizations today, especially in the IT segment, many organizations, 70% of people of the workforce have not been to their workplace, not even once. They joined the organization remotely. They've started working remotely, and they're working remotely, right? So there is no connect, face-to-face connect, and that's probably why I think Anne was talking about Narayan Murthy advocating people coming back to office. So that's definitely a challenge. Great resignations are definitely a challenge. When people are in a flux and you really don't know, I think IT sector especially is suffering from 30 to 40% attrition. Some organizations even have a bigger attrition percentage. And when almost your entire workforce is getting replaced by new people, how are you going to measure emotional intelligence? Because you don't have a stable workforce which has been there with you for a longer period of time. So these are some of the challenges that probably organizations see today. I think more than looking at a assessment tool to measure, I know there are scientifically designed tools available today, but more than that, I think we should really figure out what are the symptoms, what are we seeing in the organization in terms of people experience, and then what we need to do about it.
Thanks.
Great.
And Jerry, I would add just one more aspect to it. See, when we talk about measuring emotional intelligence, if there are great matrices that were mentioned about measuring wellness, holistic wellness, the retention, the satisfaction of employees, etc. But yes, these are great ways to measure this particular metric. But I think we should go one step further. Organizations should go one step further and also look at what is the ROI, what is the return on investment for all of this. So, is it that we just say that, yes, as a metric, hey, we have very engaged employees? We have people who are emotionally very well right now, but that should also cascade to certain other positive results. If you have that, right, it should show in maybe things like change adoption. It should show in the business performance. It should show in the productivity, and ultimately, it should also show in how your customers are feeling about the services your employees and you as an organization are able to produce. So, while wellness is a great measure for us to start with, I think we should also not stop there, but also show what are the outcomes of achieving a great wellness or an emotional intelligence score for the organization too.
Great, great. I think great points there by both of you. Look for symptoms, look for outcomes, and don't just focus on the dimensions. Great. So, Rajiv, I'm coming to you with this question on challenges, right? That's just been outlined. And we've seen this challenges being faced by multiple companies across domains. What are your thoughts on sustaining emotional intelligence and then also scaling it up across the organizations?
Yeah, so it's interesting how the questions that we are posing the panelists here, right? If you notice, we're talking about ROI, we're talking about measurement. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's left-brained, right? And so while that is needed, right, what is the right brain solution for it in a way that it is holistic, right? So to your question on sustaining emotional intelligence, to me, any level of sustenance in any domain of life is a question of creating the right habits. right? If the habits are in place, things can be sustained. And how do you build these habits in an organization is a question of culture building. Now, it boils down to that literally, where do we have enough role modeling from senior leaders, right? Where is it just a tick in the box saying, okay, I've done this survey, I've done a few workshops for leaders, or are leaders truly demonstrating the values of empathy and emotional intelligence themselves, right? And I take a leaf out of again Satya Nadella's book Hit Refresh, where he talks about an organization back then which was seen as evil, right? Microsoft back in the day, a dominant force in the industry back then. How they had a know-it-all culture, how they had to become humble and become a learn-it-all culture. That was a cultural transformation that he personally spearheaded. Right, so there is a lot of role modeling that is needed to bring in that empathy in the workplace, and I think at a team level, psychological safety is very important. Our leaders actually promoting that sense of psychological safety for people to voice their opinions, feel included, feel a sense of belonging, and is vulnerability okay? And especially during this time where we are facing personal issues, professional issues, mental health issues, all kinds of issues, are we able to open up in the workplace and talk about these things without being branded as somebody who's not professional? Right, so I think that's an important one, and very important to have support systems, mentoring and coaching, like Surya pointed out earlier. Do we have support systems within the organization to make it work? And yes, learning programs obviously play a big role to sensitize people towards this issue, which otherwise never gets spoken about openly, right? So I think it's a combination of all of these things that will really ensure sustainability of these efforts within the organization.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I really like how Raju is pushing us to think about the right brain often in this conversation, and not just think of metrics and numbers, as it were. So, thank you so much for sharing that, Rajiv. Surya, and I'm coming to you again on the question of scaling up right now. So, how can leaders play an important role here? Because I think, Surya, you've highlighted the mentoring and coaching aspect. Could you talk a little bit more about that, on how leaders play a very important role in building emotional intelligence and reinforcing these habits that we want to see across the organization?
Well, leaders play the most important role because they're in a position to influence others. They can motivate others. They can lead by example. And Raji was talking about role modeling. They can become role models. I mean, who else is in a better position than a leader to influence people and then kind of bring in a culture of emotional intelligence? Just because the fact that they're leaders, they definitely have the influence, the probably the capability, not necessarily always, but they're expected to have the capability. They're the ones who can motivate others, inspire others, and so on. Now the question is, leaders are also human beings like anybody else in the organization. So that's the point. So then, as the very common announcement that we all refer to while flying, put on your oxygen mask first before helping others. So leaders also need help. In the last couple of years, when I have been talking to my peers in the industry and many leaders in the industry, many of them have confided in me, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that a lot of leaders have reached this stage where they have felt, why am I doing this? Why I'm doing this? Is it worth doing? Should I continue in this role? Because leaders themselves are struggling today under tremendous pressure for growth, pressure for retaining people, meeting your objectives, driving the strategy, and in the midst of conflicting priorities, finding the right balance. So I think the starting point for the leader is the leader himself or herself. So it begins with self-awareness. A smart leader who is not self-aware can be extremely destructive. Because if I'm not aware of my emotions, if I have out of control emotions, I kind of flare up, I yell at people, I may be extremely smart, I may be driving numbers for the business. I might be reading balance sheets like nobody else. I can set up, I can expand the business into multiple geographies. But if I'm not self-aware, if I'm not aware of my emotions, and if I don't know how to act on my emotions in the inappropriate way, I can be damaging for an organization. I think the beginning is self-awareness. That's where it all begins. Then once one is self-aware, once the leader finds the balance, then he or she can help the larger organization find that balance. Now, I think a Western philosopher said something very powerful. He said, what we take from this world gives us our livelihood. What we give this world gives us our life. So what we take from this world gives us our livelihood. What we give this world gives us our life. All our life we are taking from this world. We are running after livelihood. But the inner being, the being inside us, is craving for life. I mean, if you peep into an individual, you will find that person is hankering for life. And that's what leaders must value and enable the organization to kind of find that. So that's why what is important for a leader is to find the purpose. So I think at the core of emotional intelligence, or core of at the foundation of an organization which has got a culture of very strong emotional intelligence, is a sense of purpose. The purpose of creating value for your customers, for the society, for the world at large. If that is missing in an organization, we cannot expect to have strong emotional intelligence, because then the organization is running after profits, maximizing revenues, etc. They are important for an organization. But if that becomes the primary purpose of an organization, and if that becomes the primary purpose of a leader, then emotional intelligence will be far away, because the leader will then run after profits, maximizing revenue, etc. at all cost. At any cost, his or her focus would be to achieve that. I think when the organizations are purpose driven, leaders are purpose driven, and when a leader is able to define that purpose for the organization and help teams, functions, groups within the organizations find that purpose, and help teams and functions and groups align their function with the larger function of the organization, and help every leader in the organization help the team members align their individual purpose with the larger purpose of the organization, then it becomes about giving. Is about making a difference, making an impact. That will drive a culture of collaboration, putting self before my own interest. That's where understanding self and understanding others will become, the primary focus. I think that's where I believe a leader plays a very important role. Thank you, sir.
Great. And do you want to weigh in on this question on leadership and scale?
Yes, thanks, Jerry. I think your question had two parts of it. One is, what is the role of leadership, and how do you implement something like a concept of emotional intelligence at scale in organizations? So I think the role of leadership, both Rajiv and Surya beautifully put it. There needs to be role models, and if there is anyone who's responsible for driving such organizational philosophies, it has to be from the top. What I'd like to focus on probably is the second part of the question which you had asked around how do we implement such strategy. If emotional intelligence as a metric of importance has to be looked at, how do we drive it? So there is this interesting methodology for organizational design and strategy implementation. It's called the STAR model. So it starts with saying, you first form the strategy. What is it that you want to implement? You clarify it with clear structure, you have people who are responsible for looking into this. So it is not just something that comes up, hangs very nicely on your boardroom walls, and then everybody forgets about it. But there needs to be people who are responsible, who are going to look at driving this through the year. The next one is you have processes that are defined that will tell you how you're going to measure it, what are the initiatives that you're going to take, what is the frequency at which these communications or initiatives will be uh, driven. And finally, also have a clear cut rewards mechanism that identifies, and reward need not always be monetary. It could be recognition for behaviors that are expressed, which are in line with the strategy that you have discussed. So unless you have this clear cut framework of communicating a strategy, putting in a structure, putting in people, then processes and rewards, often these could become really good points that you talk about and are framed on a wall somewhere, but never really translated into the grassroots levels of the organization.
Great, great. I think there's some great thoughts there, Anand and Surya. I think both of you have covered both the logic and the action steps as well. So thank you so much for that. Rajiv, I'm coming back to you on this same line of thought. We've heard a lot on strategies to sustain and scale, but we're seeing that this context rapidly change with work, right? And how do you think leaders can accelerate the scale of emotional intelligence and create this resilient workforce in spite of this change?
Sure, that's a great question. So we often think in terms of scale, but to me, it all starts with one, right? The self, beautifully put by both Anne and Surya. So it starts with the self, and around that self, the leader, there is an ecosystem. Let's say a leader has 10 people, and the transformation happens with those 10 people, and then these 10 people interface with 10 more. And I think that's how change begins. So, in other words, be the change that you wish to see in the world, right? If we want a kinder workplace, I think we need to start from ourselves, right? I think that's essentially the starting point. But the question is, how do we accelerate this, right? How do we make sure that if you're dealing with an organization that's 100,000 people strong, 200,000 people strong, how does it reach the entire organization? And for this, obviously, there are capability building programs that can be thought of at various levels, right? So interventions that include case studies, stories of how this value got demonstrated. Some experience sessions can be done, but more importantly, conversations around this particular topic is what's really going to unlock value, where people take an issue at hand and they have a discussion around it. And I believe that community building around this issue is what's going to make it, I think, accessible to people. It builds a common vocabulary where people understand issues the same way, and they have sort of a good response to that issue at hand. So I think these are some responses that I can think of for scaling it up. It begins with one, and then it's a lot of ecosystem building after that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rajiv. We also have a bunch of questions popping in from the audience, and I'm conscious of time. So, one last question to all of our panelists here today. What is maybe your one key takeaway that you would like to share to our audience today? Can we start with Surya?
Well, personally, I think I have learned a lot of things from my two co-panelists. And my takeaway is we are living through very challenging times, yet they are the most exciting times. All we need to do is find the balance. And I really liked what really impressed me a lot when Anne said something which was very powerful. It's not about the conflict is not between the right or wrong. It's about my right and your right. For me personally, that's the biggest takeaway. And I think I look at it about finding the balance between conflicting views, between life and livelihood, profits and purpose, profits and people, health and work and life. I think if we find that balance, I think we would figure it out how to sell through. That's my biggest takeaway.
Great. Anne and then Rajiv.
Yeah, Jerry, I think for me, what evolved as along with the discussions here is the thought of, we've always known emotional intelligence is very important. We've talked about it. It's not a new concept that emerged now. It has probably taken center stage after diversity, which went probably last decade, and then it was wellness, and now work-life harmony, and now emotional intelligence seems to be the one on the spotlight. But like with all the matrices and interests that organizations have picked up along the way as we mature, is how do we measure this? How do we make this more relatable? As a concept, as a fancy term, it sounds very good, but how do we make this more relatable to our organizations? How do we show the return? And I think there were some fantastic thoughts that Rajiv, Surya had shared on how we should measure these and how we should actually assess the impact. Sometimes we can do things as a check in the box, like Surya mentioned, but the trick is to also make sure that is it really benefiting the organizations that we work for or the societies that we live in. So that's my biggest takeaway of making this very relevant to our organizations and our society and our people.
Great. Rajiv?
Yeah, I'm just grateful that I'm part of this panel, listening to both Surya and wonderfully articulated points that will stay with me for some time. What Surya mentioned about purpose and the way he broke it down from a functional standpoint, from assessments to promotions to every stage within even rewards and recognition. How do you bake this in so that it becomes part of the system and it's not one more add-on or a tick in the box? So I really liked that thought process. And with Anne, obviously, a lot of rigor I can see from right metrics, ROI, and beautifully integrated with the overall story of the organizational purpose as well. One thing I would love to share with the audience here is something that I often think about. I do a lot of work in the digital transformation space, and we all know the capabilities that AI is gaining over a period of time. We are losing to AI in the game of chess, and self-driving cars probably can drive cars better than most humans now. So the one thing I often think about is, as AI becomes more and more human, will humans become more and more human? That's what I often keep wondering about. So maybe that's this time in history where we have to make that choice as we think about automation and a lot of other things. Can we instill human values in our workplace?
Fantastic.
Very
I think that's
powerful.
yeah, absolutely. All right. So I feel like we can just live with that thought for a minute, but we have some questions pouring in from the audience. So I'm going to quickly take them. Okay. So one question from Lavina on the concept of organizational citizenship, and if you could talk for a minute about this. Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know what exactly the question is, but if you're asking what is organizational citizenship behavior, I think this was a concept that came in first by someone named Daniel Organ. What he describes it as, he puts it very beautifully. I will try to remember the sequence in which he puts it. It says it is the individual behavior that is discretionary for an individual. It is not explicitly written or mandated by an organization or recognized by a reward system, but it promotes effective functioning of an organization. So it is that sometimes, simplified, it is that concept that you sometimes walk in and you say that there is something about the air about this place. It's that invisible thread that holds organizations together. and it's often rooted on very intangible concepts or intangible shared feelings like empathy, collaboration, etc. So if you can read up about it, is it Lavina?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Lavina, you can just search about it. You can read about it, but there's quite a lot of material on organizational citizenship behavior and how you can promote that within your organization.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question on the responsibility of HR alone. So I'm just gonna like tweak this a little bit. Is it the responsibility of HR alone to promote emotionally intelligent workplace? Shouldn't top level executives and managers also take part in this? I think we've addressed the managers and leaders part to a good extent. But if I could sort of tweak this question and ask maybe Rajiv, what is the role of HR in promoting emotionally intelligent workplace?
Yeah, I think Surya has already answered this question beautifully, so I don't think I can do any more justice to that question. But really, breaking it this down to every step in the employee's life cycle, from the outreach that we do, the branding that we do, to how welcome we make them feel on day one, to fairness in the whole career progression path, the kind of opportunities we provide them, right? And he rightly mentioned our successes celebrated, are the right decisions being made, are people operating with integrity. So all of those things, in a way, in an organization, the HR is the custodian for many of these things. Obviously, this capability has to be with everybody, but HR obviously plays a big role in ensuring that this culture sticks, right? And I would love to just paraphrase what Surya already has so beautifully answered.
Fantastic. So there's a question from Sanjeevan, and he asks, in a manufacturing scenario where we deal with a large blue collar shop floor workers, how can emotional intelligence be used for cultural change, productivity, and creating a healthy atmosphere? Surya, do you want to take this?
I may not be able to do justice because I don't belong to that industry.
Right. Okay.
I don't know if
But
Rajiv or
just all right. Okay. So it's an open question then for everyone.
Yeah, so
Rajiv, would you like to take this a shot? Yeah.
I don't belong to the industry either, but I'll take a shot at this because certain human values are applicable across the board. So I'll go back to what I started with, right? The right brain, left brain, sort of either or exist, and the fact that we need to have an and in between. It's not work or life; it's work and life. It is not profit or purpose; it's profit and purpose. So that integration mechanism needs to work well, right? In whatever scenario we operate in. So similarly, in the shop floor, where it possibly is all about productivity of the employee, can we also bring in that purpose element, their well-being element, and have an and in that equation that makes it favorable for the worker as well? Right, so it's been one-sided for the longest time. I think in the industrial world, it was all about the factory, the production, the mechanisms, the processes, and so there was no voice of the human there. And today we are talking about human-centric design, right? Design thinking and other things. And I think in many manufacturing setups, you're starting to see human-centric design. And one example that I often like to talk about is the MRI devices, right, that you find in hospitals. Right, there is this experiment they did with, unfortunately, kids that are having to go through that claustrophobic experience. It's not too great for them as an experience, right? So they are terrified of that, and so they did some design thinking to this whole environment, and they created a theme park out of that entire thing. So there is actually a small cart that takes the child into that tunnel, right? And that's how the experience is redesigned, right? Obviously, you can see the thrill of that little kid who was terrified earlier wants to do it now, right? So can we apply design thinking in our workplace, putting the human right in the center? That itself brings in empathy, that brings in the human needs as an important factor in our workplace.
Great. Rajiv, thanks for that answer. Rajiv, really agree with you on how the design thinking can change the experience at the workplace. I'd also like to make a point here. Surya mentioned before about purpose, right? Recently, in a Deloitte or a McKinsey survey last year, it said that 70%, and this was a cross section of all industries and not specific to any sector. It said that 70% of the workforce currently at work said that they expect their purpose to come from their work, right? Could possibly be because we as right now we don't pretty much belong to a 9 to 5 work culture at all. But shockingly, only 15% said that they get that purpose from their work. Now, I don't really think that the want for purpose is restricted to any particular industry and any particular color of job, white, blue, gray, at all. I think as human beings, this is one thing that will cut across every strata of society. And maybe the way you communicate purpose may change, the language may change, the sophistication or the articulation of it may change to make it more relatable and understandable. But I think everywhere workers are looking for purpose at their workplace. So when you try to build emotionally intelligent workplaces at differing industries, you've got to assess what is the sense of purpose that your workforce needs, and then build that in. So I really don't think that anyone at a production environment or a manufacturing or a retail or a healthcare sector will have a different need. I think this is a Maslow's need that has been cut, that will be there for all human beings. We all search for purpose. So I think this, if we are able to think through who is your workforce and what is is the purpose that they are searching for, and how can you align it with the purpose that the organization can provide to them, you have your answer.
That's
Fantastic.
beautifully put, Anne. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, absolutely. So, all right. So there's another question on from Habibur Rahman, who wants to know: is it not high time for to develop tests? I think both at the government level and probably also the company level to focus on emotional intelligence as a major attribute that candidates should have. Uh, does anyone want to weigh in on this question of
I can
test? Yeah, go on. Yeah.
I can make an attempt. I think Habibo is a great recommendation. I would go one step further. While we can definitely focus on emotional intelligence as a major attribute for candidates aspiring for jobs, etc., but can we go one step further and introduce that in schools and colleges? Because when you're looking at candidates, it's already late. They've already spent 20 years. Can we do it even before that? And then use it more as a developmental assessment, not a selection criteria, right? Let's not rate candidates as on a scale of 1 to 5 as a 3 or a 4 or 2, and then say somebody's good or bad. But let's probably introduce that in schools or maybe colleges and find out people actually who are getting ready. Those are the places where they're getting groomed for future profession or employment. And those assessment findings can be used as developmental tools. They can be used to actually bring in intervention which will help students, young minds in the country, develop emotional intelligence and be better prepared for the workplace whenever they get an opportunity. That's my perspective.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Surya. So we're out of time, but I just have one question more from the audience. I want to make sure that we answer this. Sayana wants to know, from a startup context that is growing at a fast pace, what is the first step that they should take to incorporate emotional intelligence?
I can take that if that's okay. So, Sayana, I think I briefly touched upon this when we were talking about how to implement this at a large scale, which is about the STAR methodology of implementing any strategy. So, first and foremost, look at in your workplace agenda, is the need for emotional intelligence already clearly put down? Have you defined it? Is it visible? That would be the first one where we say strategy. Second one is structure. Are there structures in your organization that help employees to express freely what they feel, understand each other, and also ask for feedback? Because one of the most important things of emotional intelligence, implementing emotional intelligence, is for one to be self aware and aware of one's team members. So, do you have structures in place which give a safe environment? Not the ones where you say if you give a feedback about your manager, you're going to be, taken to task in your next appraisal. Not such ones. But do you have very very safe environments put in place that give employees freedom to express and know each other and reduce the blind spot? And finally, are there reward and recognition mechanisms there for role models to be highlighted and recognized when they demonstrate such behavior?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Surya, Anne, and Rajiv. I think we got the best panelists for this session. It was great to listen to all of your insights, and I'm sure our audience found it very useful. And thank you for truly making this a remarkable hour of learning. I'd also like to thank our partner, Nordscape, for sharing this invaluable information with us and helping us curate this session. I think it's made us all go back with actionable insights. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Do share your feedback with us on the chat section. There will be a link to the survey, and do stay tuned for more such exciting sessions. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you,
Thank
Surya.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you, Anne.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, Anne. Great
Bye.
talking. Thank you.